A blood stain and a lifeless body can be seen on the cracked ground. Fragments of weapons, shields, and swords are scattered nearby. Someone is shouting that if the opponents break through, they will die. You can see a guy with a sword in his hand and a girl in armor behind. Someone gives the order to carry the wounded to the rear. The brunette swears at a large number of opponents. A girl with brown hair lies on the ground. There are abrasions on her face. She looks up hopelessly. She says that they are all doomed and only death awaits them. Some guy with a glove on his hand heals a huge wound on her stomach with magic. He asks why such a depressive atmosphere. The guy fixes his gaze on her, spreading his arms. He says that thanks to him they will definitely not die, and shows the girl that the wounds are already healing. The girl turns her head to the side, closing her eyes in dissatisfaction and frowning. She sharply replies that all the people here will die anyway. The guy turns his head and gazes into the sky, where creatures resembling griffins hover. He agrees that there really are a lot of monsters. The girl asks him to save himself. The predatory faces of griffin girls are visible flying in the sky. The girl shouts to the guy that he is an S rank, so his death will only make things worse, since if he gets into a situation where he cannot fight, he will be in danger. The guy furrows his eyebrows in displeasure, repeating the girl's words while she sits up and holds her stomach. She asks him to run before it's too late. The guy gets up and puts his hand on his side. The girl, in bewilderment, asks if he is about to go into battle and tries to convince him. The guy is holding a large sword in his hand. He says he understands the girl's concerns, but he is not an easy target. The guy turns to his interlocutor and smiles softly, frowning. He says that he will never leave the girl to die here and asks her to take a break for now. The guy gets into a fighting stance and moves his hand with the sword slightly back, gathering a purple aura around him. He lunges forward, brow furrowed. A crowd of people with different weapons in their hands look ahead of them. Griffins hover in the sky above them. They scream about being crowded, but someone notices the healer walking towards them. The characters fight monsters, defending themselves with shields in hands. People behind notice the guy approaching. One girl calls him Young Hyesung. Someone warns the guy that the battlefield is dangerous, but he smiles calmly and confidently. Jeon Hyesung flies into the air with a sharp jump, finding himself in a crowd of griffins. A girl with a wound on her stomach watches the main character in horror. The crowd watches Jeon Hyesung's movements in surprise. One girl covers her mouth with her hand. The main character, with swift lightning, passes through the ranks of griffins and beheads them. Jeon Hyesung's confident and stern gaze is visible. People discuss how this is possible, since he is just a healer. In 2023, the world has changed beyond recognition. An image of a strong man with scars and a huge sword on his shoulder emerges. It is said that Supermen have appeared. Then a man with blonde hair and a cold gaze appears, and in his background there are inscriptions in an unknown language. It is said that an absolute generation of people has also appeared. Then a nun appears with her head covered. She closes her eyes and folds her hands in a prayer position. Someone called superhumans messiahs, called to rid the world of evil. Nobody could understand where they came from. Their capabilities were beyond human understanding, and their goal was clearing dungeons. A squad of a girl with red hair, a man with long white hair, and a dark-haired man is visible. They define themselves as those who hunt monsters, hunters. A girl with red hair holds a huge sword on a thin hilt. A dark-skinned guy and a man with white hair stand with her. The dungeons represented the goal of a world parallel to the earthly one. A huge portal is visible, surrounded by a purple aura. Hunting in the dungeons is an integral part of the life of hunters, because the creatures from there are the main source of their income. For people, monsters were only a source of problems. Terrifying monsters appeared suddenly. A lava monster resembling a golem presses its fists into the ground. The monsters came from portal gates that connected the earth and the dungeons. Ordinary people without abilities had no chance against them. The golem spews lava right onto the city. People run away in horror. It seemed that the earth was doomed, or so many thought. The golem raises its head as lava flows down its body. But that was before the hunters appeared. A girl with long hair falls quickly, drawing her sword from its sheath. She lands directly on the monster, destroying it. The goal of the hunters was precisely hunting, and not protecting the population. The silhouette of a girl is visible among the rising smoke. People look at her in surprise, pointing. However, the help of the hunters came in handy, and for ordinary people they quickly became heroic saviors. The girl turns around, putting her sword on her shoulder, her hair flying. However, for the main character, all these global changes and heroes meant nothing. A doctor in a white coat and glasses sits at the table. He talks about the terminal stage of the disease. A guy covered in spots sits in front of him. He looks at the doctor in bewilderment. The main character was terminally ill, and any day could be his last. A guy is riding a bus, wearing a gray hoodie covering his head. He picks up the phone and sees a call from his sister. The main character picks up the phone and puts the phone to his ear. The sister asks if he has been to the doctor. Young Hyesung replies that he just finished and is on his way home. The sister asks how far he is, and the main character replies that he is near Jeban-don. The sister replies that she called to say that she will be late at work. She apologizes and says not to wait for her, but to eat without her. The main character holds his phone to his ear and says displeasedly that his sister is disappearing again at her terrible job. His sister convinces him that everything is fine and that she will cope. The girl holds a pink phone and asks with a smile what the doctor said. The main character is thoughtfully silent, thinking about the answer. The guy looks down thoughtfully, his mouth parted. He says they didn't tell him anything special. The action returns to the conversation with the doctor. Young Hyesung asks how he can be terminal. The doctor extends his hand, gesturing as he answers, and says that his disease is unknown to science. The doctor makes notes on the diagram and announces that every cell of the protagonist's body seems to be saturated with poison. He adds that it's surprising that Jun Hyesung is even alive. The doctor folds his hands. The protagonist's body trembles. He smiles hysterically, chuckling, and asks if he has any chance of surviving. Young Hyesung admits that this is all very sudden. The doctor silently looks ahead, his eyes not visible behind his glasses. He closes his eyes and briefly replies that he is sorry. The main character is riding on a bus, frowning displeasedly and looking at his phone. The screen shows a just completed call with my sister. Jun Hyesung tensely raises his hand to his head and thinks about how to tell her everything. The main character sharply looks at the phone, raising his eyebrows. People on the bus jump up from their seats in amazement, looking at their smartphones. The man with glasses furrows his eyebrows in horror. A couple in matching sweatshirts look at each other, asking what they should do, and suggest they run. On the phone screens you can see a warning system window, where it is written that the opening of the gate was recorded at 12:45 in the Guppadon, Jeban-don area, and that civilians urgently need to evacuate. The main character thinks that there have been no such warnings for a long time. Young Hyesung brings the phone closer to his face, looking at the screen in bewilderment. He understands that the danger is in the place where the bus is now passing. The main character turns his gaze to the window. A shadow falls on his face. A huge monster with crazy red eyes and a long tongue is visible. People's eyes widen in horror and they step back. The monster opens its mouth, throwing its tongue forward. The tongue goes right past Jeong Hyesung and a few other people. Blood spatters are visible. The main character looks down, his face obscured by a veiny tongue. He notices glass shards scattered on the floor. The face of a man appears, covered in dark veins, with blood at his mouth. The girl raises her hand to her face, calling out to her lover. The man in glasses watches in horror what is happening. Through a broken window, a long tongue burst into the bus and struck a guy in a pink sweatshirt in the stomach. The crowd screams in horror that he is dead. The guy strains his arms, the veins on them are visible. His eyes roll back and he falls. The bloody body collapses lifelessly on the floor of the bus. Someone takes an uncertain step to the side. Then the crowd quickly begins to run. The girl is crying over her lover. The man persuades her to get up and run, but she resists. The action moves to the office. A girl with long dark hair holds a stack of papers, aligning them. A woman with a bun on her head holds onto the door and tells the girl at the front desk to go on a break. She looks at her colleague with a smile, smiling sweetly and holding papers in her hands. The girl says she will finish soon and will join. Then she is already holding a mug of tea in her hands. A colleague admits that he admires her. The girl with dark hair looks at the woman with the bun and asks about the reason for her admiration. The colleague replies that usually girls her age are more busy with dates and other entertainment, and she works overtime to pay her brother's hospital bills. The colleague admits that she feels sorry for the girl. Sister Jeong Hyesung raises her eyebrows in surprise as she looks at the woman. Her cheeks turn faintly pink and she smiles. The girl says that not everything is as bad as it may seem, because this is her only brother. A woman with a bun on her head looks at the girl in surprise. She smiles and closes her eyes, agreeing that family is the most valuable thing people have. She explains that even if the whole world is against her, her family will always be on her side. The woman regrets that her children are not like that, since they fight even after 20 years. The glass in the hands of Jeong Hyesung's sister falls to the floor and the tea spills. A woman asks what's going on with her colleague. The girl does not answer, as she is looking at the TV screen, where they are broadcasting a report from the Jeban-don and Yupa-don regions. The face of the protagonist's sister darkens with horror. The action moves to Jeban-don. Corpses are visible lying in a pool of blood. One of them is covered in slime. The guy can barely sit on the steps of the bus. A stream of blood flows down Jeong Hyesung's forehead as he looks ahead in horror. The monster wraps its tongue around his leg, but Jeong Hyesung tries to resist, leaning his hands on the floor. He thinks that he will not get out, since the monster is very strong. The main character admits that there is no need to deceive himself, since he was doomed from the very beginning. He looks at the pile of corpses in pools of blood and wonders where the hunters are. Jeong Hyesung rests his hands on the floor and looks at the screen of his broken phone. There is an open dialogue with his sister in the messenger. The girl asks if he is okay. A shadow falls on Jeong Hyesung's face, and he desperately asks her for forgiveness. He sees a huge monster wrapping its tongue around his body. The main character reflects at this moment how he wanted to repay his sister for all the good things she did for him. But now he leaves without saying goodbye. The main character looks ahead in horror, thinking that all he can do is regret what was not done in his helplessness. However, he cannot just sit and wait for death. The main character grabs a sharp piece of wood lying on the floor. He says that those who die fighting the monsters are awarded a medal, and their families are given benefits. He wants to do at least this last. Jeong Hyesung squeezes the shard so hard that he bleeds. He opens his mouth wide, screaming furiously at the monster. He picks up the shard of glass and scowls, insulting the creature. The main character thinks that this is his last gift for his sister. The monster screams ferociously in madness, revealing a row of fangs. He starts wagging his tongue from side to side as he grabs Jeong Hyesung's leg. The main character flies up in the air. The toad looks straight at him. Jeong Hyesung is turned upside down. He teases the monster, reasoning that he lives as he wants and eats everyone. The creature brings Jeong Hyesung closer to his mouth. He holds a fragment in his hand and talks about all the killed people. The main character's face shows anger and bitterness. He frowns, declaring that the monster does not have long to live. The main character kicks away from the toad's tongue. He runs towards the monster, aiming straight for its wide-open mouth. The main character, in cruelty, raises his hand with his weapon directly above the creature. It hits him in the eye, from where blood begins to spray. The main character cuts the monster. A stream of blood stains his hands. Jeong Hyesung throws wild punches at the toad. There is darkness before his eyes. He thinks about what happened and whether his attack worked. A monster's face appears in front of Jeong Hyesung's face. He grits his teeth and frowns, realizing that he did not harm him. The monster's long tongue quickly rises up and ends up above the guy's head. He thinks that he only achieved the anger of the monster. The tongue wraps around the protagonist's hand. It then slides down his torso. The monster raises his hands to Jeong Hyesung, who grins. He says he was hoping to do something, but the monster doesn't care. The main character admits that he wants the people from the association to give his sister money. The toad throws its head up and swallows the main character. The main character falls into the monster's stomach. He thinks that his life is over, but it was still meaningless. Memories with a smiling sister pop up in the main character's head. She asks how he is doing at school. He then sees her with a smile on her face. She folds her hands and says that Jeong Hyesung is an obedient and kind boy. The girl touches the little protagonist, covered with spots, with her hand and says that he is a sweetheart. Something like tentacles appears in the darkness. The sister sits down at the boy's height and with a smile assures that when he gets better, they will travel around the world. Long pink veins are visible inside the monster. The girl hugs her brother by the shoulders and presses him to her, saying that their parents left them, but she is with him and will always take care of him. The heart begins to beat wildly, emitting a purple glow. The main character declares that he does not want to die. The body of the monster with the gouged out eye is shaking. The creature raises its head and opens its mouth, from where a white glow emanates. The toad falls apart. Pieces of its flesh are visible. Among the stains of black liquid and pieces of the monster lies Jeong Hyesung. His head is tilted to the side, his eyes are closed. The action shifts to the city center, buildings are destroyed, and debris is strewn everywhere. Someone reports that a pair of gates opened around 12:30, and this is unprecedented. The sudden disaster caused significant destruction. A detachment of people in uniform and gas masks with weapons in their hands is visible. The reporter says that Chief Gugongi sent a special force to take control of the situation. All efforts are aimed at protecting the population from monsters. A reporter asks questions from the public about the Glory Guild. A woman with short hair with a smile on her face replies that you can rely on them, because life has become calmer. She is confident that the Guild of Fame will protect her from monsters. A sign with the inscription Jebin Dawn, splattered with blood, is visible. Another man with blue hair answers the reporter's question. He says that the Guild of Glory knows their business and deserve the title of national heroes. Sister Jeong Hyesung runs through the city through a mountain of corpses. The reporter says that the head of the guild expressed condolences to the affected citizens and their families and made a formal apology. Half of Gugong's face is visible, dressed in a formal suit, microphones next to him. He says that he apologizes to all those who were unfortunate enough to be in the affected area. The girl quickly rushes down the street, tears rolling down her cheeks. Gugong can be heard speaking in the background, saying that they are making every effort to solve the problem as soon as possible. He asks to take refuge in a safe place and not go outside. A comment is heard that the Guild of Glory is famous for always coming to the rescue. Gugong opens his mouth in a smile. The main character raises his head, opening his mouth and breathing heavily. He turns and squints one eye, looking around in surprise and wondering what happened. He remembers that the monster will definitely swallow him. Young Hyesung raises his bloody hands in front of him and looks at them, reasoning why he survived. The main character raises his head from the ground, holding the back of his head with his hand and squinting. He says he feels dizzy. Someone's voice is heard talking about a dream. The main character turns his gaze to the bus and thinks about the ringing in his ears. Someone calls out to him from behind, and he quickly turns his head. Young Hyesung recognizes the voice. He looks at the road, where the destroyed buildings are visible, and calls out to his sister, but does not see her. He covers his mouth thoughtfully and thinks that he is hallucinating. He immediately discards this idea, as he definitely hears his sister's barely audible voice. He sees the monster's remains covered in its blood and says he doesn't know what happened here. The main character thinks that his sister is somewhere nearby. He leans his bloody hand on the ground to raise himself up. He notices that it is too dangerous here. Young Hyesung runs through the city in a bloody hoodie, looking around, looking for his sister. The girl cups her hands near her mouth and calls out to her brother. She looks towards the city with tears in her eyes and looks for Jeon Hyesung. A sound is heard from behind the brick wall. The girl turns in his direction. She walks around the corner, holding onto the wall, and asks if her brother is there. She looks ahead in horror. A shadow falls on her face. A whole crowd of monsters are crammed into a corner. The girl leans back with wide eyes and thinks about running. She steps on a stone and it splits with a crunch. A crowd of red-eyed toads look from the corpse they are eating to the girl. She puts her hand forward, taking steps back, and asks the monsters not to come near her. The girl suddenly runs out from around the corner and is slightly skidded to the side. Immediately after her, a crowd of toads jumps out. The girl breathes heavily and runs very quickly. With her head down, she accelerates, dust flying from under her shoes. She slows down and can barely walk along the road. She hopelessly realizes her head is up and looks ahead in horror. The road is littered with debris from the bridge. The girl thinks that she will die here alone. She bows her head, large tears flowing down her cheeks. She folds her hands and thinks about her brother. Has he reached the shelter? One of the toads appears behind the girl. Young Hyesung's sister thinks that she can't give up and that she must find her brother and save herself. The toad jumps on the girl in a rage, and she shrinks fearfully. Someone rushes behind the girl like lightning and knocks down the toad, insulting the monsters. Some kind of metal weapon is visible in the main character's hand. He asks irritably where the people from the Glory Guild are. The girl turns her sad face, looking to the side. Her brother appears before her, completely splattered with blood, and she calls him by name. His face frowns furiously. The main character asks his sister to keep her distance, since these are not ordinary monsters. Young Hyesung takes a step forward. He looks at a huge crowd of ferocious toads and rushes at them. Monsters versus an ordinary person is an unequal fight, but Jeong Hyesung has no doubt about victory. He raises his hand with the weapon up. He then quickly unleashes his blow. Lesser dark toads are weak. Their strength comes from their poison rather than physical superiority. The main character, with his head down, is waving a weapon, surrounded by toads. He bares his teeth and frowns, moving his weapon hand back. Jun Hyesung knows that he is stronger. He doesn't understand where this confidence comes from, but he really feels different after waking up, stronger. Jeong Hyesung's eyes glow purple as he fights off a crowd of monsters. One of the toads puffs up, producing a lot of purple mucus. Young Hyesung was overcome with excitement. The toad spits out a purple blob in front of him. He flies straight at the main character, who looks at him in horror. It all started with curiosity. The toad that the main character fought at the beginning is remembered, and it is said that their poison is quite powerful, so Jun Hyesung should have died immediately. However, instead of dying, the damage on his body suddenly began to heal on its own. Then Jeong Hyesung realized the truth. The main character looks at his hands, covered with mucus, with a smile. He says he didn't imagine it. He clenches his hand into a fist, mucus running down his face and body. Jung Hyesung confidently says that the creature's poison does not affect him. He throws his hand up and insults the monsters. The main character takes a piece of pipe in his hands with a grin. He thinks that there are few of them left, but if he continues to crush them one after another, then victory will be his. One dead toad and a crowd of others still alive are visible. The main character frowns confidently and looks forward decisively. A giant toad appears behind him and raises its paw over him. The little toads were enough to make Jun Hyesung let his guard down. The main character flies to the side with enormous force. The toad pushes Jun Hyesung away from him in one motion. The sister, with tears in her eyes and hysterical, calls her brother. A rapid flash passes behind him and he flies into the wall. The sister screams at the monsters not to touch him. Jung Hyesung sits against a cracked wall, dust emanating from his body. He looks up with lifeless eyes and a pitiful expression on his face. The main character thinks that he has lost consciousness again and does not understand what happened to him. He sees the silhouette of a trembling sister, in whose face there is a huge toad. Jung Hyesung says that everything is swimming in his eyes and is glad that he did not die right away. The girl, in horror, grabs the pipe and puts it in front of her. The main character frowns and opens his mouth wide. Rising from the ground, he calls his sister. He says he will come soon. The girl looks forward with hope, her eyes open wide. She tilts her face so that her eyes are not visible, tears and sweat rolling down her face. She asks him not to come here. The main character is holding his hand to the wall. One of his eyes is swollen with blood. The girl is trembling. He sees her back. The sister holds the pipe tightly with her hand and asks him to run. The toad reaches out its clawed paw towards the girl. Jung Hyesung tries to divert its attention, but the girl stands motionless in front of the monster. She smiles pitifully, closes her eyes, turns her head to the guy, and asks for forgiveness. The main character is already running towards her and sees blood splashes in horror. Someone like her, who took care of her brother so selflessly, shouldn't die like that. The main character looks ahead in confusion and despair. He sees blood splattered onto the pipe. Jun Hyesung asks his sister not to joke and wake up. He doesn't understand why she chose to fight because of him. The toad clenches its jaws, watching carefully with its 4 eyes. The main character covers his face with his hands in despair and says that he would have died soon anyway. He sees a large snake in front of him with a red aura around him. In confusion, he asks if she got out of his body. The toad looks at the snake carefully. Jung Hyesung says that he doesn't care. If she helps kill all the creatures, then he agrees to anything. The main character looks in front of him. A tear flows from one of his eyes, and the other looks like a snake. He bows his head, his hair covering his face. The snake opens its mouth wide and rushes forward. She pierces the toad's body with a red arrow. The main character curses the toad. A girl in a raincoat and heels sits on an advertising banner, watching the main character with a smile. She says that Jun Hyesung is very good. He was even able to summon a scarlet viper. The woman sees a huge hole in the road left by Jeong Hyesung. She calls him a fun little guy, but says he better control his power. The girl rests her chin on her hand, smiling. A mole is visible next to her lips. She says that if they find out about the guy, a real hunt will begin for him. The girl is wondering whether to help the main character. Jun Hyesung holds his sister in his arms while watching the new toad. The woman with the mole says the guy can barely cope. The tired face of the main character is visible. He is breathing heavily. A new crowd of monsters is rushing towards Jeong Hyesung. He thinks that the creatures keep coming and never ending. The main character puts his sister on the road and tilts his face towards her, reasoning that he cannot let her die because of someone like him. The guy covers his sister with his sweatshirt and says that she risked a lot and that her sacrifice will not be in vain. With a confident gait, Jeon Hyesung moves away from his sister, informing him that he will definitely return for her and advises him to save his strength. He steps forward and feels his breathing weaken. Jung Hyesung concludes that there is no time to hesitate, and because of the monsters around, it will be impossible to escape, so he will have to fight. A large fang toad rushes forward. The main character stands in front of it. Jung Hyesung thinks that if his sister survives, then it doesn't matter what happens to him. The main character raises his hand, clenching it into a fist. He suddenly spits out blood. He doesn't understand what's happening to his body. The guy is on his knees, pressing his fist into the ground, and thinks that this is a side effect of the snake that he caused. Young Hyasung tries to force himself to move. A huge fat toad appears above him. Her tongue quickly moves towards the body of a guy who can't come to his senses. He clenches his teeth and squints his eyes, trying to stop the bleeding. The main character hears some sound to the side of himself. The fog clears in front of his face, but he does not look, keeping his head down. The woman says that Jun Hyasung overdid it. The main character raises his head in surprise. The girl pushes the monster away with a confident smile, and stands in front of Jun Hyasung. She says releasing so much black ether has consequences. The girl looks at Jeon Hyasung with a piercing gaze of yellow eyes. She introduces herself as Carol. Carol says she would like to chat more, but first she needs to clear the way. A toad appears, lashing out at the characters with its claws. The girl quickly rushes past the main character and smiles slyly. He grabs the guy by the collar and drags him along. Then she throws him forward onto the road. Curl waves at him and asks him to lie down with his sister. The main character raises one eyebrow in bewilderment and breathes heavily. He asks in surprise how she managed to easily throw him with one hand. The toad hits the ground with its paw. Purple waves spread around. The girl quickly runs around the toad's paw, grinning and saying that the monster will not keep up with her. Curl quickly climbs onto the monster's paw. She rises higher, towards the toad's face. She starts waving her long tongue. The toad pulls out its tongue in surprise and does not understand where the girl is. She lowers her face, opening her mouth slightly when Carol shouts at her. The girl raises her fist and jumps out from the side with a smile. She hits the monster right on the head. The toad explodes, flesh flying in all directions. The main character shields his face with his hand, his hair fluttering from the blast wave. He thinks that the monster was torn apart by one blow from Curl, and that this girl is an S-class huntress. Jun Hyasung concludes that she is strong. The main character clenches his hand into a fist. His veins are visible. He says that he wants the same, and then corrects himself that half of this power would be enough for him to protect the person dear to him. The guy frowns and purses his lips. Carol asks why he is depressed. The girl appears right behind the main character, surprising him. Young Hyasung looks away and says that everything is fine. Carol tilts his head to the side and smiles, declaring that his sister will definitely survive. Young Hyasung looks at the girl with hope. Carol says his sister is lucky, but not everyone is so lucky. The main character looks at her in horror. Behind him a girl covered with a hoodie can be seen. Carol says that if she didn't know how to heal, the girl would die. The main character says that the words that his sister would survive were not a joke. The girl's calm and peaceful face is visible. He reasons that there aren't even any scars left on his sister. The main character says that he could not even think that combat hunters capable of healing existed. Young Hyasung bows his face, a shadow falls on his eyes, and he thanks Carol. He reasons that she saved his family. Tears roll into Jun Hyasung's eyes. He sobs and continues to thank the woman. Carol asks why he is crying. The main character raises a pitiful face to her. The girl throws up her arms, the hem of her cloak flutters, and she smiles widely. Carol says that the guy acts as if he himself almost died. She brings her face closer to the main character and looks straight into his eyes, asking him not to be dramatic. The guy looks at her pitifully in bewilderment, his mouth slightly open. Carol looks at the main character with pity and says that he will certainly survive. She turns around and walks away from him, saying that she needs to deal with the monsters. The main character is on his knees and asks her to wait. Carol turns to him, raising her eyebrows. He asks that if the information about his recovery is true, then can he become as strong as her? Carol looks down at him, her cloak fluttering in the wind. The guy holds his hand and frowns. He says he's tired of life passing him by. Carol smiles slyly, turning her head over her shoulder towards him. She turns to the monsters who are rushing towards him in a crowd. Carol tells the main character to watch her and learn. A sphere surrounded by violet energy is visible. Carol says that she will show him her signature technique. She calls it poisonous rain. The girl raises her hand up, forming a purple spiral. A stream of energy rises upward, reminiscent of purple lightning. It pierces the sky, tearing the veil of clouds. Carol says this is the level to strive for. The main character carefully observes the woman's actions. Purple rain begins to rapidly fall on the ground. He thinks that hunters are strong. Toads look at purple drops falling from the sky. It would seem that everyone knows the power, but the main character has never seen such overwhelming power. One drop quickly falls straight into the toad's eye. Touching her body instantly causes terrible pain, causing the monster to scream. Jeong Hyasung thinks about how Carol, with a simple wave of her hand, caused rain that riddled all the monsters around. Poisonous rain falls on the toads, tearing them apart. Carol got rid of all the monsters at once. The toads in front of the main character die right behind the back of the proudly standing Carol. She asks again about the main character's question. The girl with a joyful smile declares that he can do the same. She says that Jun Hyesung will become the greatest hunter in the world. The main character looks ahead in surprise, his mouth parted. Jun Hyesung hangs upside down in front of Carol. The girl holds his leg and looks at his body. She asks not to call her teacher and to address her as you. Drops of sweat and scratches are visible on the guy's face. He asks if he can ask a question. A woman holds a guy by the leg, black daggers hover next to him. The main character worriedly asks if they will kill him. Carol grins. The door to Jeong Hyesung's room is visible, and it is decorated with a sign with a teddy bear and a rainbow. Carol bursts into laughter behind the protagonist, while he looks at her over his shoulder and asks her to stop. He bashfully says that he thought he was going to die. The girl wipes away the tears that came from laughing. She holds out a purple sphere to the main character, from which smoke emanates. Carol says she wants to fill him with black ether. The main character raises his eyebrows in confusion. Carol repeats the title and says that Jun Hyesung doesn't even know about it. She extends her hand to the side and asks with a smile if he knows about poisoners. The main character says that he has heard about them. Poisoners are quite famous. This class of hunters was considered cool in their time. A dark figure of Kuril is shown with glowing eyes, with two more men behind. After one incident, the poisoners disappeared from view and are now despised by people. Carol's figure grins, venom swirling around. The girl puts her hand on her hip and looks forward with a naive smile, while the main character calls poisoners enemies of humanity and traitors. She asks if he missed anything. The main character begins to guess. Carol calmly closes her eyes and says with a smile that she is one of these villains. The main character actively waves his hands, his mouth wide open. He apologizes. Carol tells him not to bother because he is partially right. The girl exhales and looks ahead, lowering her gaze. She says that Jun Hyesung wasn't too shocked and asks if he was scared. Behind the wall from them, the protagonist's sister is sleeping on a futon. You can see her serene face with her mouth slightly open. The main character says that Kurl saved him and his sister. He admits that at first he thought that the girl was abnormal compared to other hunters. He looks pitifully at Carol and asks for forgiveness. The girl waves it off and says that she's even pleased. With a sparkling face like something out of an old anime, she declares that poisoners are truly abnormal. Carol raises her hand and proudly says that they are even special. Glasses appear on her face and she holds them with her hand. The girl states that the originality of poisoners becomes obvious when they fully awaken. The main character does not understand what she is talking about, and Carol says that it is better not to know about it. A picture of a row of people appears, one of whom is crossed out with a cross. Carol says that ordinary hunters die upon awakening extremely rarely. The mortality rate is less than 1%. The same row of people pops up, some of whom are highlighted in green. The girl says that at this time poisoners often die while they awaken. In this case, the reason is always the same. A man is seen clutching his chest with black liquid running down his face. Carol says that poison is constantly synthesized inside each poisoner, and they get worse day by day. When the concentration of poison reaches a certain point, they explode. The figure of one of the poisoners is seen holding his throat while blood sprays from his body. The main character raises his hand to his face and thoughtfully says that this is what is happening to him. Carol giggles, covering her mouth with her hand, and confirms his words. He guesses that he is a poisoner. Jung Hyesung concludes that all the pain he went through was just a symptom of awakening. The guy removes his hand from his face, leaving it in front of him. Carol congratulates him on being a poisoner and calls him handsome. He thinks in bewilderment that he is a poisoner. Carol kicks down the door, leading the main character with her. She says you need to stop talking and get busy. A girl stands on the edge of a high-rise building, overlooking the city. She explains that poison is synthesized inside each poisoner. Carol puts her hand on her side and confidently looks ahead. She rhetorically asks how poisoners live with this. She explains that the poison also heals them. Carol takes out a syringe filled with purple liquid and asks to excuse her. She throws a syringe at the main character, and it hits him in the chest. The girl explains that the healing power of poisoners exceeds all boundaries of reason. She asks Jung Hyesung to imagine him sleeping, eating, and his healing power always active, no matter what he does. Violet liquid is visible shimmering in the syringe. The girl says that there is no way to get rid of the poison, but their bodies have adapted and every second they neutralize the poison, turning it into black ether. The main character picks up an empty syringe with a drop of poison on it. He looks at it suspiciously and asks if it is safe. The girl laughs and covers her mouth with her hand, calling it a gift for the student. The main character thinks that the second one will kill him, but Carol interrupts him. The girl puts her hand out. She says that she decided to start developing Young Hyesung's mobility, although he also lacks self-confidence. The girl states that it was an injection of her own black ether. The girl gets into a fighting pose, ready to train Jeon Hyesung. She commands him to do a small squat, but the main character raises his hand and says that he wants to ask a question. The guy slightly puts out his hand and asks in surprise if Carol didn't say that poison rain is her one and only skill. The girl silently looks at him, stopping. The main character puts out his hand and tilts his head in confusion. Carol makes a jump from one roof to another. The main character argues that she avoided answering. The main character frowns and watches her, thinking about how great Carol is in terms of skills. However, he notices that she flies like a tank. At the same time, Carol rushes forward. An hour passes. Carol jumps between houses. Young Hyesung asks her to stop. He grabs his neck, tilts his head, and reasons that he won't be able to do the same without any physical training and that Carol overestimates him. The girl asks why he is depressed. She jumps to the edge of the building where they are training. Carol suggests trying first, and then being sad, because everything can turn out to be very simple. The main character states that it is easy for her to speak. The girl raises one eyebrow, looking at him in surprise. The guy tilts his head. A thick shadow falls on his face. He says that Carol is strong, so she doesn't understand how difficult it is for him. The girl crosses her legs, sitting down on the edge of the building. The main character humiliates himself in front of her. He smiles pitifully and looks away, saying that he has heard all this all his life. He looks up, folding his arms over his chest. Young Hyesung says he knows it sounds like an excuse, but he's scared. You can see the landscape below the building, a road and an alley of trees. Carol looks to the side thoughtfully, pursing her lips. She admits that she was wrong. The girl runs and heels along the edge of the building and says that this style of teaching really does not suit the main character, and she should have taken this into account. She turns to him with a smile and says that from now on it will be tough, so she asks him to get ready. The guy raises his head, his mouth parted in surprise. Carol takes him by the collar and pulls him towards her. She says the most important thing is his emotions. A shadow falls on the girl's face. She smiles widely. Carol asks him to concentrate on the very tips of his toes, and then direct all his emotions there. The main character looks down. His head is tilted. Sweat appears on his cheeks. He says that this is no longer funny, but cruel. Carol sits on the edge of a building and holds a guy by the jacket over the whole city. She looks at the landscape with delight and admires the blue of the sky. The girl lets the guy go down from above with the words that this is a wonderful day to be reborn again. The main character thinks that she just threw him down. The girl waves at him with a smile and wishes him luck, declaring that he will only die in a bad case. The main character falls down in horror, his mouth wide open. He thinks that Carol is crazy. The main character's body rapidly falls down, fear frozen on his face. Carol tells him to push off the wall and jump to the next high-rise building. Young Hyesung thinks about something that is easier said than done. The edge of one of the high-rise buildings is visible. Young Hyesung says that he will kill himself if he doesn't do anything, so he should at least try. The main character strains his leg, veins protrude from it, and his body is covered with a purple aura. He thinks about concentrating on the very tips of his fingers. The guy squints his eyes and frowns, gritting his teeth. He quickly falls. The main character is surrounded by ghosts with smiles. They say unpleasant things to Jeong Hyesung and humiliate him. The guy falls down, arms outstretched, a purple aura concentrated in his legs. He thinks that he did not choose how to be born. The main character leans on his legs, squatting. He pushes off the wall and flies up. Young Hyesung looks down, tears in his eyes, realizing that he was able to do this. The guy flies up and sees the roof of another building in front of him. He doesn't understand how to land. Carol praises Jeong Hyesung. The guy turns his head to the side, closing one eye. Carol extends her hand to the main character with a smile. She says that Young Hyesung was too fixated on the fact that this was impossible. But everything turned out to be much simpler. The woman presses the main character's head to her shoulder and calms him down. The main character looks forward over Carol's shoulder, his tears melting into the air. Carol says that when his life is on the line, it is much easier to learn something. Carol looks ahead in surprise, pursing her lips. Young Hyesung asks her to remove her hands as he feels uncomfortable. The girl's pupils run from side to side, narrowed. Carol holds Jeong Hyesung by the eye, lifting his eyelids. He is indignant and asks to let him go. Curl's pupils blur, taking on an unnatural shape, and a phrase about the poisoner device is read in them. Something similar to a lens comes away from the eye, and the main character tries to dodge it. He doesn't understand what's happening. The same inscription that was in the girl's eye appears on the system window. Carol stands in front of the system window, where registration of a new user, compatibility check, confirmed belonging of a living organism to poisoners, synchronization with the user's body are broken down point by point. The main character talks about a portable device and asks if it is an advanced technology that all hunters use. Carol confirms his words and adds that this device is different from those that others usually use. The Guild of Fame may have never seen anything like this before. An image of a two-handed sword appears. This is an attack type. Then a pickaxe is visible, which is a mining type. Then a backpack appears, belonging to the collecting type. Curl puts out her hand and explains with a smile that lenses are divided into types that have characteristic features. Young Hyasung grabs his head, ruffling his hair. He reflects that lenses are a very useful item. The main character asks if it was possible to convey it in a normal way. The main character raises his head up, holding it with his hand, and asks where Carol is going and why she is in a hurry. The girl exhales, closing her eyes. She says the guy has a keen eye. Curl turns her back to the main character and says with a smile that she is being pursued and it will be unsafe if she is discovered, so she cannot linger. The main character looks at her, a shadow falls on his face. Carol takes the guy by the hair, stroking it, and tells him to find Dr. Jean. The girl spreads her arms in front of him, explaining with sparkling eyes that he is a genius and her comrade and that he will bring Jun Hyasung up to date. Carol places a purple sphere in Jeong Hyasung's palms. She explains that the device will help him find Jean and he just needs to follow it. Carol declares that this is her last gift. She says she gave everything she wanted. The girl smiles softly and says goodbye to the main character. The main character wonders why such a kind person is being persecuted. Young Hyasung calls out to Carol and she turns around. The main character thinks that he does not understand why the girl goes so far because of him. The guy looks ahead with furrowed brows and admits that this is the first time someone cares about him, so he is grateful. He adds that he wants to repay the girl one day. Carol freezes in surprise against the sky. The main character declares that she is the one to whom he owes his life. Young Hyasung puts his hand to his chest and with a determined look says that he doesn't mind if he has to work hard, because if it helps Carol, then he will do anything. Carol turns away. Her face is serious. She disagrees and says that it is too early for young Hyasung to think about helping her, since he needs to gain strength. She says that he needs to become so strong that he does not fall into despair at the sight of enemies who are many times stronger than him, and in order to protect everyone. The girl looks hopefully at the main character with her yellow eyes and asks him to promise this to her. The guy clenches his hand in a fist and agrees. He raises his hand and with a determined face promises Carol to become strong. The girl steps on one heel. Her body is covered with a purple aura. She says she believes in Jun Hyasung's success. The main character thinks that Carol is free, like the wind. She says goodbye to the main character and jumps, waves of air emanating along the ground. These were Carol's last words before she disappeared. Young Hyasung looks ahead, raising his eyebrows in surprise. He thinks that his life has a purpose. Jabun disappeared. A newspaper clipping is visible with a headline about the successful clearing of the gates to Guppa and the disappearance of Jabun. The news broadcasts the idea that the Guild of Glory only saves those who have money. The townspeople are furious. The main character thinks that because of what happened, criticism of the Glory Guild is gaining momentum. This is especially noticeable on the internet. Anonymous comments condemning the Glory Guild are visible. Then user comments. Someone says that in their world the rich always live, and the poor always die. Another commentator condemns the association's ban on helping victims. Almost all comments are devoted to condemning the guild. A few days after the incident, people began to support the Glory Guild again. Approving comments are visible, discussing the benefits of the Guild of Glory. After a few more days, the criticism disappeared completely. The user asks Chairman Gugongi to continue the good work. The main character ties his sneakers while sitting on the floor and says that there is a limit to the horror that one person can betray. He thinks about Mount Jeongyeon. The main character opens the door and leaves the house. A note was left on the table stating that he would be gone for several days. The main character stands near the houses and holds a purple sphere in his hands, thinking that Carol gave him this thing. Young Hyasung tilts his head, the cap casting a shadow on his face. He wonders what it is and says the orb looks like a monster's core. You can see the purple ball up close. Inside it shimmers in different shades. A system window appears with an inscription about the core of a giant toad. Young Hyesung holds the sphere in his hand with his palm facing forward. The main character remembers the girl telling him to hold the ball and remember how he felt when he used the poison step. The ball rises into the air, enveloping everything around in a purple haze. The main character looks down in bewilderment, his mouth open. He thinks about the core entering his body. A system window appears stating that the status of the black core has been changed and the level of black ether reaches 37%. The percentage increases and reaches 100. The system window notifies that the user's current black ether level has increased significantly. A new system window appears notifying that a total of 15 black ether units have been consumed for use and that the absorbed ether can be used to strengthen the body. The main character looks at the hand from which a purple glow emanates. He thinks that he needs to absorb ether to become stronger. Jun Hyesung opens his mouth slightly, his eyes invisible, thinking about how strong he is now. The device tells him that the body corresponds to the level of an E-rank hunter, and that if he continues to absorb black ether and manages to accumulate the required amount, he will be able to obtain a body corresponding to an S-rank hunter. The main character sees his torso covered in a blue glow. He looks at his hand, remembering Curl's face, and thinks that he can really become a strong hunter. The main character hears someone's voice and raises his head, looking forward in surprise. He sees a banner with the words "Roadblock" on it. Standing nearby is a man in an inspector's uniform and a woman with a child. She is trembling, while the man rudely tells her that entry without a pass is prohibited. The girl asks why they even set up a checkpoint here without warning. She explains that her child is sick and asks if the well-being of the citizens should be a priority. The woman holds the little boy close to her. He is shaking all over. The girl frowns and says that these people are not even from the government. The man's face is distorted with anger. He frowns, his pupils narrow madly. He begins to threaten her that he will break her jaw. A little boy is crying and holding his mother's clothes with his hand. A man insults a woman and asks if she will take responsibility if she poisons or infects others. He calls her a beggar and says that people like her always think that they are better. The main character approaches and says that they abandoned this place to the mercy of fate, so as not to get their hands dirty when the gates first opened. And now they want to save face. The man clenches his teeth in rage and looks away. The main character takes rapid steps with his head down. He says that people died here in dozens, and the guild was silent, but now they put on a whole show. Young Hyesung looks at the man's face and smiles, noticing that he doesn't agree. The man takes up the baton, frowning with displeasure, and begins to threaten his status. The main character draws attention to the patch with the letter G and arrowheads forming a star. He says that this patch is familiar to everyone in Korea, and that the man is probably from a company that works for the Guild of Glory. The man approaches Jun Hyesung. He looks down aggressively and declares that the main character allowed himself to say such a thing after finding out where he was from. Young Hyesung lifts his face, his eyes glowing purple. He provokes the man by answering him decisively. In his mind, he thinks that this is the first time he is about to get into a fight. A man from the guild, with cruelty in his face, swings a club at the main character. He says that Jeong Hyesung should learn the rules that the guild has set in this country. The main character says that it would be a lie to say that he is not scared. The man unleashes a swift blow, a hint of cruelty on his face. He grins, showing a row of strong teeth, and states that Jun Hyesung will be hurt, but he should think of it as a lesson he's not familiar with. The main character clutches a club in his hands. It cracks from his grip. He easily breaks it in half and says with a grin that anything he doesn't do after the man hits him will be considered self-defense. Mentally, the main character says that he is not going to hide anymore. The man puts his hand forward in surprise. Jun Hyesung never learned to fight. At this moment, he raises his hand to strike, clenching it in a fist. He has an unstable stance and intermittent breathing. The guy's fist flies forward rapidly. The punch he throws is something other than a beginner's punch. The main character unleashes all his power on the enemy. His body is special. The guy exhales. Holding his fist slightly behind him, he looks ahead in surprise. The man lies sprawled on the ground. Young Hyesung victoriously squeezes his hand, reasoning that he has become stronger. The man's face is distorted from the blows. Blood is oozing from his nose and mouth. He asks for help. The main character looks at him contemptuously, exhaling. He asks her to stop whining. A woman with a child watches in surprise as Jeon Hyesung talks about what people screamed when the gate appeared. The main character clenches his hands into fists, looking at the prone enemy, and explains that people waited and believed that the Guild of Glory would come to their aid. The main character turns away. A shadow falls on his face. He says that he is only talking in vain, since the enemy is not listening to him. Young Hyesung raises his hand and says that he is leaving. The woman looks at his back in confusion. The main character stands at a blue payphone, looking around at it. He asks if he is in the right place, and the device answers him positively. Young Hyesung approaches and tries to go inside, reasoning that it is suspicious. The main character picks up the phone and tries to call someone, realizing that it doesn't work. He presses the rectangular red button. The character reasons that first we need to find something that will stand out against the background of the wasteland. Young Hyesung holds the phone in his hands, looking at the device in bewilderment. A circle resembling a hatch is formed under the main character. The floor suddenly collapses. The main character falls down, leaving only his cap. The hatch on the backside slowly opens. The main character lands right on the floor of some gray building. He rises from the floor, holding onto his back. He lowers his face in frustration, rubbing his bruised side, and jokes about being in the movie because the descent was far from gentle. He turns his head and looks into the far part of the room. The main character extends his hand and says that he is sure, as if Dr. Jin is crazy too. Young Hyesung raises one eyebrow, looking ahead in bewilderment. He notices some splashes. He raises his hand, which is covered in blood. The main character raises his head in horror and says that he miscalculated the place. The alarm begins to indicate an intrusion by an unauthorized person and that a transition to defense mode has been made. Young Hyesung looks around worriedly. The ceiling of the room is visible in a red sheen. Devices with guns appear from holes in the ceiling. The alarm orders to eliminate the intruder. One of the cannons is aimed at Jeong Hyesung. They all start releasing purple gas. Another cannon is visible, which releases toxic smoke. The main character covers his face with his sleeve, trying not to breathe. He notices that it is a poisonous gas. The main character takes steps back, covering his nose. He says he thought Dr. Jean was Carol's close friend. Jun Hyesung begins to wonder if Jin betrayed her or someone attacked him. At this moment, Jun Hyesung holds his chin with his hand. He realizes that he has inhaled poison. The main character suddenly stops in thought. His pupils narrow. He thinks that if it is poison, then he is in no danger because of his immunity. The main character smiles happily and starts jumping for joy. He inhales and exhales a lot of poisonous gas, claiming that it is even refreshing. Young Hyesung hears footsteps and sharply turns his gaze to the side. A masked man is moving down the corridor. He watches what is happening from the window in the door and thinks that the main character will soon die. At this moment, Jeon Hyesung thinks whether this person is an enemy or an ally. A plump man with a mask on his face appears behind the door, talking about people from the association. The main character thinks that he has no time to hesitate. He rushes at the man with a sharp push, knocking him down. The guy ends up on top of the man, pressing him with his weight. Young Hyesung raises his hand with a serious and angry face. He asks why the man attacked him. Young Hyesung looks down in bewilderment. The main character looks in horror at the motionless man in the mask, not understanding what is happening. The main character thinks that the man has fainted. A man wearing a gas mask sits in front of Jeong Hyesung. He asks about Curl helping him. He finds himself tied up in front of Young Hyesung and breathing heavily through his mask. The man asks to let him go because he feels uncomfortable breathing. Jun Hyesung claims that he won't do it because he doesn't know what the man is capable of after he loosens the rope. The man declares that he is not a bandit, but the great Dr. Jin. The main character begins to untie the rope behind the man's back. Young Hyesung asks why Jin needs traps. He says that if it were not for his immunity to poison, he would have died long ago. The main character manages the rope behind him, tightening a new knot. Jin states that he designed the traps this way. Jun Hyesung brings his displeased face closer to the man and frowns, declaring that he is not joking. The glasses in the gas mask glow with white light. Jin explains that ordinary people will not be able to get into this shelter. Therefore, the only people who come here are Carol and other hunters. He offers to explain everything. Jin says he's embarrassed, but he's a really talented scientist. A newspaper clipping is visible where Jin, wearing glasses, stands with a medal in his hands. He explains that many people need his help. In the past, he had a hard time because of the crowd of intrusive people. Jin is seen in bed, having difficulty sleeping. The man says that these were difficult and unstable, but interesting times. Jin lifts his head from the pillow. At this time, his voice says that there was a problem that was haunting him. It's all about the pursuers, of whom there were more and more. A figure appears in front of Jin with a knife in his hand. He looks at her in horror. Jin reveals that assassins from other countries, shady organizations, and even hunters from the association are targeting his life. Jin is seen running out of the house in tears and calling for help. He reasons that there was little reason for this, his money or technical skills. Jin stands next to the policeman and gives his testimony while he is recording. His voice explains that even under constant attack, he survived. Jin looks somewhere to the side in despair. A policeman is watching him. Jin says that over time, he realized that everyone around him had his sights set on his life. Suddenly, the policeman behind Jin grabs a knife and points it at her back. The ropes on the doctor's body loosen, and he ends the story by announcing that since then he has limited all contact with people and has begun to develop paranoia. He also began to live in secluded places. He doesn't know how people find him, but they keep coming. Jin says there isn't a place in this room that isn't covered in blood. The door and floor are visible, which are covered in blood. The main character clutches the rope in his hands and says that even though he freed him, this does not mean that you can do something bad. Young Hyesung asks why Jin even told his biography. The man stands up and turns his head, answering, Jeon Hyesung is the one who was sent by Carol, and he trusts her as much as he trusts himself. He thinks about what the girl is doing now. You can see an alley in the city in heavy rain. Jin remembers sitting in the rain, his side bleeding, breathing heavily. Someone is calling him. A girl with long shaggy hair and spots comes up. She hands him an umbrella and asks what Jin is doing here. She looks at him with yellow eyes, covering herself with a tattered umbrella, and asks if Jean was abandoned the same way she was abandoned. Jean thinks that the main character and Carol are somewhat similar. The main character clutches a rope in his hands. Jin thinks that Jun Hyesung is the same as Carol. Jin takes off his robe and says that the student is very similar to the teacher. Young Hyesung points at himself in confusion and says that the only similarity is that they are poisoners. Jin says that it's not just that, but the main character does what he wants, just like Carol. And Jeong Hyesung also has spots that the girl had too. The main character opens his mouth slightly in bewilderment. He thinks that with her appearance, she definitely did not suffer from the same disease. An image appears of a winking and elegant Carol with her hand behind her head. Jin says that this is true now, but it was different before. He turns to the main character and tells him to follow him. Young Hyesung goes after the doctor in surprise. The main character hurriedly follows the man. Jin asks what Young Hyesung thinks about the poison in his body. The main character admits that he didn't think much about this. The doctor says that to summarize, 1 drop of Young Hyesung's poison can kill a rank hunter. The main character pulls back slightly in bewilderment and frowns. The doctor says that Young Hyesung has surpassed the concept of biological and chemical weapons. That's how strong his poison is. The main character ponders Jin's words and doesn't understand how this is possible. Jeon Hyesung looks ahead, pursing his lips. He says that his body is definitely E-rank, which is why he is stronger than before he awakened. But he has no illusions. The main character admits that he heard that A-ranks are not even considered people, they are so strong. Young Hyesung thinks that he can kill such people with just a drop of blood. The doctor says it's too early for him to rejoice. Jin enters the code on the panel, some buttons light up blue. He says that an ability that cannot be controlled is unsafe. If you leave everything as it is, the main character will definitely become a time bomb. The main character, in surprise, asks what he should do. The door opens in front of the characters and Jin steps forward with his hands behind his back. He points his hand to the room where the exercise equipment is located and says that the main character must train. The doctor turns his head towards the main character. He says that his marks are symptoms that show that he is unable to control his own poison. They will pass as soon as Jeong Hyesung starts to control herself. The main character looks straight ahead, nodding. The doctor says that he personally trained Carol, so the main character has nothing to worry about. Jin promises that Jun Hyesung will change beyond recognition by the time he completes his training. He points his thumb towards the exercise equipment and tells Jun Hyesung to go work out. The doctor raises his hand up, expressing support for the main character. He points his finger at Young Hyesung and frowns, telling him not to relax his stance or he'll start over. The doctor grabs the disc with the number 50 in his hands and says that he will add more weight to him. The main character bows his head, sweat runs down his face. He clenches his teeth. Young Hyesung lifts a dumbbell, throwing up his head with a bandage. Jin tells him to imagine that the dumbbell is his self-esteem. The main character is already rolling his eyes from exhaustion, and Jin says that the broadcast needs to be strengthened. 7 days pass from the moment you arrive at the laboratory. Jin steps out of the corridor into the training room, where the main character is standing. Young Hyesung claims he has a new record. Much has changed. The first change is that Jin took off his gas mask, which means that he began to trust Jun Hyesung. The man smiles, his mustache and glasses are visible. He asks why the main character called him. The main character looks at him in confusion, not recognizing him. For the insult, Jin gives Jeon Hyesung 2 more hours of training. The doctor is sitting at the table with a mug of cocoa and marshmallows. The main character says that when Jin was young, he could pass for handsome, but over time he changed. The main character says that the second change was that his sister woke up. The girl sits with a note in her hands and is shaking all over. The main character admits that his sister told him that she panicked when she woke up and didn't find her brother nearby. The main character is holding a phone in his hand, and screams are coming from there. Young Hyesung says that his sister was screaming at the top of her lungs, but he used all his acting skills to make her believe him. The third change was a new device. Jin examines the main character from all sides, trying to study him. He then gives Young Hyesung a cube with a purple orb hidden inside. The main character says that this is an advanced version of the device that Carol gave him. The main character stands next to Jin, looking at the device with delight. Drawings are visible behind the man. The doctor did it in 3 days. The biggest change has happened to Jun Hyesung's body. The guy's strong back and a towel on his right shoulder are visible. Jun Hyesung washes his hair, closing his eyes and sighing heavily, and contemplates giving up training for a couple of days. The main character looks in the mirror, holding his chin, and sees that there are fewer spots. The changes in his body were amazing. Jin claps his hands while looking at Jun Hyesung. He admits that he knew that the main character was handsome, but he became especially handsome after training. The main character thinks that the doctor is very surprised. Jeong Hyesung's beautiful body is seen holding a small set of hygiene products in her hands. Jin praises Jun Hyesung's beauty. The main character raises an eyebrow in surprise. He watches the doctor quickly eat some canned food. Young Hyesung sits on the device, his body illuminated by a purple aura. He asks if the doctor is bored. The ether is strengthening. Jin asks why he should be bored. The main character says that he was alone for so long and asks how he managed not to get bored in such an environment. He looks down the hallway of shelves lined with canned goods and asks if he's tired of eating it. The doctor raises his chopsticks and says that he is not completely alone. He points his chopsticks at Jeong Hyesung's shoulder and says that there is some creature sitting like that. The main character turns his gaze in the direction where the mentor is pointing. A small black dragon appears on his shoulder and Jun Hyesung screams in horror. The doctor asks to say hello to Pori. Jin excitedly clenches his fists in front of his face and enthusiastically says that Pori is the most charming creature in the whole wide world. He is one of the monsters that poisoners tamed many years ago. Even if Pori bites someone, it is the same as a slight sting. Perhaps it's because Pori is weak, but Jin doesn't want to think about it. The doctor begins to talk about the most amazing thing. Pori is able to absorb the poison of its owner. The creature wags its tail cutely. The main character listens to the doctor in surprise. The doctor says that Pori clung to the main character 2 days ago, but he did not notice. The main character looks in surprise at the little dragon, who raises his yellow eyes to him. The guy thinks that during all this time his sensitivity has increased several times, but at the same time he did not even notice the creature on his shoulder. The doctor says that this is not surprising. He explains that Pori is able to completely hide her presence. The little dragon spreads its wings. Its body becomes translucent. Jin remarks that Pori cannot be an ordinary monster.